So Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, we're a small charity that's very proud of the fact that we say we like to do big things for the people, landscape and wildlife in the Dales. We've been around for 30 years now, and we work through raising money to give out so others can do their own projects. We deliver our own projects, and we also try as much as possible to work in partnership because you can achieve so much more working together. And we're hoping going forward we can work much more with all of you here in the room would be ideal. So the woodland team, we've got a small team, there's 4 of us working on woodland work. And because we do work in partnership, I always feel at the end of the season, the planting season, this winter we planted or supported the planting of 34,000 trees and shrubs. You know, I always think, oh, well, at least that's something. And it's because we work together for trees. So that's all in partnership. Many of you in the room that are also out there planting, and we've been able to fund landowners or community groups to help get those trees in the ground. So as well as planting, we also have a woodland management programme. So we're supporting landowners in getting woodland management plans in place. And then we also have a grant programme that can fund some of that management work. Very much focused on small woodlands, less than 3 hectares, that might not get funding from elsewhere. Within that woodland management programme, we've also been sort of spearheading the issue of the plastic tree guards. Our trustees, I think they've always wanted us to address it. And in 2019, we had an initial conference where we brought lots of stakeholders together. And the aim was always people wanted an alternative they could just put on the tree, leave it there, and it'd be good for the environment. Unfortunately, that's not proving possible at the moment. So the focus at the moment is getting those guards off the trees and getting them recycled seems to be the best approach at the moment. And then we've always had a woodland grant programme. There's lots of funding out there for tree planting now, so our programme is focused much more on smaller woodlands, right down to landscape trees, and hedgerow, any way of getting trees in the ground. And going forward, I have an ambition now to focus much more on perhaps looking at scrub habitat and supporting the creation of upland scrub habitat. So Seed to Sapling, we started, as I say, 4 to 5 years ago, and it was really an opportunity to look at a different way to engage with people in woodland activities. Obviously, tree planting is great, and we have lots of people that want to come tree planting with us, but the reality can be quite different. So obviously, it's a winter activity, quite physical. And yeah, growing trees just seemed to open up the opportunity to engage with a different audience. I mean, I only have to look at that photo and think, I have the best job in the world. Who wouldn't want to be doing that? So yeah, it provides opportunities throughout the year. And our intention with Seed to Sapling was very much about working with community groups across the Dales and looking at establishing micro nurseries. We didn't quite know what form that was going to take, and I'd never grown a tree myself, so it's been quite a steep learning curve. So as well as local communities, I just put this slide in because we do work with lots of different groups from sort of neighbouring urban areas as well, and aiming to get all different types of people engaged in woodland activities. But the Seed to Sapling, we're very much focusing on local communities, and the communities we've been working with so far have been Malhamdale, Swaledale, Clapham and Settle area, and Crosby Ravensworth. It's not to say we wouldn't work with other groups. That's just been our focus because we'd been involved with these groups previously with tree planting schemes. And that photo there of Eva, many of you all know Eva here, who's organised today. Eva's our Community Conservation Officer. So thanks to Eva that we've got this day going on. And she's responsible for putting on lots of different training and events for community groups, and is always open to new ideas, because the idea is that we're wanting to enable people to achieve their own environmental ambitions rather than us impose what we think should be happening. So if you've got more ideas of what you'd like Eva to put on, then do feel free to contact her. And there's a sign-up sheet on the back table for the Community Conservation newsletter. If you're not signed up to that, that's where you hear about everything that's going on. So yeah, so do sign up to that. So Seed to Sapling, obviously, first stage is you've got to collect your seed. So initially we were like, perhaps veteran trees would be a good place to collect seed, because the intention was for the trees that we were going to be growing to be of local provenance. it's not always easy to know if a tree is of local provenance. So we thought, oh, well, let's focus on, getting out and getting volunteers identifying ancient trees and perhaps collecting seed from them. But it's not always easy because those trees are often big and the seed's way up there in the sky. So it's not always the best approach for seed collection. The alternative, we've been looking at ancient semi-natural woodlands, but again, they can often have trees that have been planted in over the years. So it's just something to be aware of, that even if it's an ancient semi-natural site, it might have trees that have not come from the local area. So it's just something to consider. I find that ancient hedgerow is almost easier to identify in terms of the age of the tree and whether it's it's been there for a long time. And it's important that you always get landowner permission, even if it's on a footpath. And in some cases, we've been getting SSSI consent if it is a SSSI, like Grasswoods or Ingleborough, Malham Tarn. We've had SSSI consent to collect the seed. And it's a steep learning curve, as I say. It was new to us, so initially we sort of visited other people and looked at how others were doing it and picked up ideas. So the box building, it initially felt like we were running carpentry courses rather than tree growing workshops. But the boxes, we pinched the idea from the Haweswater Nursery, the RSPB approach. And that it's worked really well. So yeah, it's a nice way of bringing people together at a workshop to engage in an activity. And the boxes, obviously, you need them to keep the seed from being eaten either by slugs or mice or birds or whatever. And people were able to take these boxes of seed home to stratify over winter. So seed stratification, there's no one way, there's lots of different approaches. For us, we just took the most sort of natural way. We wanted to mimic nature. So basically, if it was a fruit, we'd squash the seed out of the fruit, and then scatter it in a mixture of compost and sand. And basically, people took the boxes home of their seed, stuck it outside over winter, and crossed their fingers. And that was the first, our first attempt at starting to grow trees. And so when the following spring came around, I was so relieved when people turned up with boxes full of things that were growing. I was so excited because I had no idea. We put on the initial potting on event, not knowing if anybody would come back with anything. And obviously the hazel was doing well. Wych elm from Clapham was doing well. And from there, that was the start, really. So potting on and labelling, obviously it's important to track and trace where your seeds come from, especially if in future there was any disease to happen, you'd need to know where that seed had been collected. Labelling has proved quite problematic. Permanent markers aren't permanent, and certainly the wooden, they've not been great. I think the approach we're finding most successful at the moment is like little aluminium tags. I think it was from Swaledale, where you can sort of scribe into the tag, so it's actually, marked in rather than with a pen. And also what you grow, what you use for potting on. We went down the route of buying root trainers after visiting Myersbeck Nursery, and the benefit of the root trainers is they take up little space, the roots grow straight, they're air pruned at the bottom, compared to, my first thought had been, let's all use yogurt pots or recycle pots, but with a round pot, the roots go round and round inside and don't necessarily grow as well. But there is no right or wrong, and, we've been supporting the groups in the approach they've been wanting to take. So Eva's been collecting lots of the sort of oat milk containers. Yeah, I mean, the disadvantage of them is they do take quite a lot of compost. But there's various approaches you can take for the containers. And so initially people went home with their boxes of seed, came back, and we've potted them on. And then in terms of nursery sites, because initially we thought, well, perhaps everyone can just grow trees at home. But then there's the issue of biosecurity. And so the idea of having nursery sites first came from the thought we need to bring all these trees back in and basically quarantine them and check they are disease-free. So from that, and also people run out of space in the back gardens, from that we've been developing 3 sites, and we'd like to, support further development of other sites. So this is our All Singing All Dancing nursery site in Clapham that was funded through the Yorkshire Dales National Park Sustainable Development Fund. It was actually £20,000 worth of work because we had fancy drainage put in and these growing tables that are at waist height with the intention that they would be accessible for people. And the idea of those came from More Trees, the community nursery in Devon, where we pinched the idea of the tables then with these protective cages on top to protect from birds and the shade. But in reality, what I hadn't thought about was when it comes to watering the trees, you've got to lift the watering can actually quite high. And so I wouldn't necessarily have gone this route, but having lived it and worked it, it's like it's got advantages, it's got disadvantages. So the approach we've taken, this is Rob and Margaret who are here today from Sustainable Swaledale. So with Swaledale, we took the approach of using these pallet collars, which they come hinged, sort of ready-made as a flat pack. And you can just build them up on top of a pallet. And as the trees grow, you can build them up higher. And so with those, all we had to do was make sure the bottom was lined with a mesh to stop mice getting into the trees, and then made a lid for them, which, and they obviously provide shelter and shade. And I think it's safe to say they're working quite well.
Yeah, I just want to say it doesn't always rain in Swaledale.
And so this is the nursery site at Reeth, where the doctor's surgery allowed us to use the back garden. So you don't need masses of space. That's the beauty for these small micro nurseries. There's 4 boxes there. I don't know if you added any more since.
We've got some at Arkenguthdale.
Okay.
The same number there, but we've got now got totally at Arkenguthdale.
Yeah. So obviously you can start off with a few and then you can add to it. So that's also a benefit of taking this approach. And it means when you're watering, you've only got to water down here rather than right up here. So we took the same approach with the Malhamdale Environmental Group. They've got a site where a landowner at Hanlith, and it's called Windy Pike. And as the name suggests, it is very windy up there. So obviously the tree protection boxes, they also help shelter the young seedlings. And I like the fact that if it is very sunny, you can put shade netting on top. And obviously it's just about getting the rotor going there. I don't think we've not got anyone from the Med group here today, I don't think, but they're a keen group. So so initially we just started off growing any species just to get in the swing of it and enjoy growing something. But we then started to think, well, actually, what trees should we be growing? And started to think more about what trees are readily available. We have a partnership with the Woodland Trust who give us lots of free trees, but often there's more niche species that are missing. And actually in trying to approach some of the commercial nurseries, just some species, it really seems really difficult to get hold of. So we started thinking about species like, the really specialised ones like rock whitebeam and juniper and just various ideas. And then we were approached by Steve Heaton, who's with us today. He's at the back, from Natural England. And they were sort of trying to find out whether we'd be interested in cultivating some more sort of upland montane species, particularly willow. Now, willow, you're probably all familiar. It grows easy. You can take cuttings, you stick it in the ground. So I thought, that's a great idea. It's an easy one to grow. But willow isn't just one species. There's several species. I couldn't find a definitive number. It seems to be between 14 to 19 native UK willow species. And I assume it's not a definitive number because you do get lots of hybrids. So the whole willow thing is a new area of work for me. That's why Steve in the back, if you've got any willow questions, point them to Steve. But we're really excited about this whole idea of being able to focus on species that, from an ecological point of view, they're really valuable. So Steve came and did a talk for us at Swaledale, which is online. I really recommend, if you've any interest in growing willow, to have a listen to that talk that's online by Steve as an introduction to willow. It's really interesting. I've watched it a few times now and I still keep learning something. And then also online, we've got other resources that Eva's developed over the few years we've been going on the growing trees. So do visit our website if you want to have a look at those other resources. So yeah, so that's Seed to Sapling, but I thought I'd just take the opportunity to just do a little bit of a plug for willows, really, and why we've thought about it and thought this going forward, this would be a good way for us to go. So why are they great and why do we need more? Well, obviously that photo is a typical Dales photo. We've got open landscape, but it hasn't always been like that. There would have been much more upland scrub, a lot more willow. And willows have been around for a long time and been used for a long time, but they're now largely missing from the landscape. So the schemes that the tree planting we've been supporting for the past 30 years, we do include willow, but it's often sort of a couple of species, mainly goat willow or grey willow. As I say, there's the potentially 19 different species we could be including. So that picture is of tea leaf willow, I think. Yep, tea leaf willow, which is an upland willow, which is good for creating a dense scrub. And the species, they range from tiny little dwarf willows up to larger trees like goat willow. So, there's lots of variety. They're very adaptable, resilient. They're commonly known for wetlands, but obviously they can also adapt to a range of habitats. And one of the difficulties is generally they're separate male and female plants. And so as they're becoming increasingly rare, it can make pollination difficult. They're great for wildlife. 750 species, of which 200 plus exclusively live on willow. And I think they're they're well known for being along riverbanks. And they're great for nature recovery because they've got a dense fibrous root system, which is really good for, soil establishment. And along rivers, they provide shade. There's so many different uses. Yeah, I think probably natural flood management is one of the areas that people think of willow straight away, with natural flood management along watercourses, and slowing the flow, and with wetland habitat restoration. But yes, as far as integrating and being compatible with farming, they offer lots of opportunity. So traditionally there'd have been a food, they were cut for feeding animals, and I think we're off to visit an agroforestry scheme with Sustainable Swaledale where we're going to see that in action, because willows themselves, they provide lots of nutrients for animals and they can help combat things like cobalt and that says against worms. I've actually pinched these slides from Steve, that's why I'm stuttering over them, because they're like Steve's slides that I've like zoomed in. But lots of minerals and nutrients. And yeah, in turn, that can reduce the amount of chemicals that farmers put on the land that then in turn help other wildlife like the dung beetle. So these are the species that we're hoping to grow going forward. We're going to be focusing on these 7. So creeping willow is one that the National Park are really keen for us to monitor. It's part of the local nature recovery plan. Bay willow, eared willow, which as its name sounds, it's one that's easier, I find, to identify because it looks like it's got these little ears at the bottom of the leaf. Dark leaf willow and tea leaf willow often hybridize. Purple willow, and then the dwarf willow, which is a real montane species. So all of these species we've found are very hard to source from tree nurseries, particularly trying to find local provenance willow. So we're hopeful that we can get everybody excited about growing willow going forward. And there seems to be lots of opportunity to get them in the landscape in a way that you couldn't necessarily get big forests in the landscape. Most of them are lower growing and they support a whole array of other species. So yeah, that was just my final slide to say willows for wildlife. The communities we're working with currently all seem very keen to get on board and start growing this. But yeah, if anybody else would like to, then please do get in contact. And together we're hoping that we're going to be, producing lots of willows for wildlife in the future.